Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm Jon Macri, and I'm joined, as always, by the great Nic Bodiford. We're halfway through the season, Nick, and you know, for some managers, fantasy managers, typically tends to be kind of the beginning of the end of the season if things haven't gone well, and maybe they're not feeling optimistic about a playoff push. But for others, especially those that continue to tune in, they're the ones looking to kind of remain competitive and do everything they can to stack up the wins and make the playoffs. So what do you say we help the good folks get there?
Yeah, if you're still trying, we support you. We salute you.
Absolutely, man. There's a lot of injuries to kind of sort through, right? So it's a war of attrition here to make it through the fantasy season. And yeah, we're still going to run through it the way we always do here. Go through some of our favorite QB and defensive special team streamers, wide receiver cornerback matchups, wide receiver man zone data, O-line to E-line matchup data, as well as some of the players picked out from Nate's Start Sit article as well that we want to highlight. All of which you can check out now on PFF.com with a PFF Plus subscription. So make sure you check that out. But Nick, let's get right into it with our QB streamers of the week. And first name for you is coming off a very productive Week 8 game on Thursday Night Football, who got his mojo back in the form of Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. What do you like about Matthew Stafford as a streamer this week?
The famous Matthew Stafford mojo.
Yes.
It's always what I'm trying to conjure when I need a win. So Matthew Stafford, they're taking on the Seattle Seahawks, which, speaking of injury, Devin Witherspoon was added to the injury report, I think, with a foot injury yesterday. So the Seattle Seahawks injury depleted defense is even more injury depleted. In the two games that the Rams have had Kupp and Nacua on field, Los Angeles ranks 5th in passing EPA and 12th in positive EPA rate. I think that this one's pretty straightforward. Both defenses really struggling. The quarterbacks are going to be heavily involved. And as you said, Matthew Stafford, he's got his guys back. They're just going to be efficient. They're going to put up points. Typically, we like guys who can run a little bit, but I think this one is just going to be a high volume outing for both quarterbacks. So Matthew Stafford, he's on the streaming QB1 radar for me this week.
Yeah, no, I like it. The big thing for me, like you said, is just how good this offense is with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back out there. You mentioned it, and you know, just the offense as a whole too, with those two guys in the games that they played this year. I know it's a small sample, but 4th in EPA per play, and then they're like 21st without them, right? So they make a huge difference to that offense. So hoping that they can keep it going here. Okay, let's go back-to-back weeks making the QB streamer list. He was a big hit last week, finishing as the overall QB2 for the week. His best fantasy game of the season. It's Nic Bodiford. Tell us about him.
So yeah, Bo Nix. It's possible that the Ravens defense can kind of confuse him into some errors, but their secondary is also banged up. They've had a really difficult time slowing opposing passing games. And Bo Nix, although he continues to be extremely productive on the ground, run for 25 yards and or scored a rushing touchdown in 7 of 8 games this year. I've mentioned that stat because it continues every week. I think he can scramble his way to some productivity here, but really, so over the last 4 weeks, Bo Nix's weeks 5 through 8 passing data, 9th highest graded passing, or PFF passing grade, 9th highest graded quarterback among 41 quarterbacks with at least 30 dropbacks. He ties for 14th in big time throws, 6th in turnover worthy play rate, 10th in average depth of target, 12th in adjusted completion rate, et cetera, et cetera. The Baltimore Ravens pass defense, they just can't really get it done. They are 27th in EPA allowed per play, 23rd in completion rate allowed, 31st, in yards allowed per coverage snap. I think this is a game where Bo Nix, with his ramshackle pass catching core, he can just remain QB1 viable. I'm not saying he's going to finish QB1 overall, but I think if you need a QB1 streamer, he is a decent option for you.
Yeah, I like the description of the wide receiver core as ramshackle. It's a good word, one that we don't hear often, but I think it makes sense for this group. But I'm with you. I mean, we saw it with him last week, right? Like 3 passing touchdowns. He added the rushing touchdown in there, playing behind a great pass blocking offensive line as well. And yeah, like you said, Ravens giving up the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks. We just saw Jameis Winston finish as the QB7 last week against the Ravens, and part of this is the Ravens offense being as good as it is. It's going to force you to pass a lot on defense. So there's some volume to take advantage of there with Bo Nix as well. And yeah, hopefully another strong week, because he's looked good. I've liked what I've seen from Bo Nix so far this year as well. So I went with a QB sit this week, and I went with Justin Herbert of the Los Angeles Chargers, who's played well this season. Though, outside of last week, it hasn't really translated to fantasy production. That was his first top 12 finish on the year. And I think, one of the concerns for me for Herbert this week is dealing with the pressure that the Cleveland Browns defensive line is able to create, because Herbert ranks 23rd in passing grade when under pressure with a 45.9. Cleveland Browns defensive line owns the highest pressure rate in the league at 41.9%. They also own the highest quick pressure rate in the league at 34.9%, and the 5th best pass rush grade at 77.5. So the poor, passing grade for Herbert, that comes from a high rate of kind of turnover worthy plays when he's under pressure. 6.0% turnover worthy play rate. That ranks as the 6th worst mark in the league. So I really like Herbert as an NFL quarterback. I think he can still perform well in NFL terms in this game, but I think there remains, kind of many more fantasy options kind of worth betting on in week 9 here.
Okay, I'm coming at this one from a different angle. I highlighted the Chargers passing offense against the Cleveland Browns pass defense in pass run funnel report defenses to exploit in week 9. Cleveland Browns defense vulnerable through the air, ranking 21st in yards allowed per coverage snap, 22nd in explosive pass plays allowed, et cetera, et cetera. This unit is not performing up to its typical high standard. They will be without Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who, although he has been released from the hospital, did suffer a neck injury. He accounts... Oh man, I've got it buried in here somewhere. He has guarded opposing wide receivers frequently in the slot or in the box when lined up in the box on over 100 coverage snaps this season. He's a very good player. I know coverage linebacker can sometimes be an oxymoron, but he does qualify. They also could be without Denzel Ward, who has suffered. The records are a little dicey here. At least his 4th, but maybe his 6th recorded concussion. I think those 2 players being out give Herbert a chance here to remain a viable QB1. So I'm in this week, but I have learned my lesson that when you come out and tell me that maybe one of these is not a great streaming option, that I do need to, kind of pay attention there. So I'm still in on this one, but I admit to the listeners that when Jon takes a stance, he should pay attention.
No, it's good. I again, like, I really like Herbert as a quarterback. So it's not to say that he can't overcome, the disadvantage in the trenches or anything like that. And the other thing too, with, passing under pressure, like, it is an unstable metric for the most part, right? So there's definitely room for him to kind of improve there. But he's got some weapons that we like as well, or at least one specifically, and we'll talk about him in a little bit, who can maybe help boost that value. So let's talk about some wide receiver starts, Nick, and we'll get to Justin Herbert's potentially number 1 wide receiver here in just a second, but we'll start at the very top with Keon Coleman of the Buffalo Bills. You've highlighted him in the wide receiver cornerback matchups to target this week, going against Kendall Fuller of the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah. So the Buffalo receiving core and the Miami Dolphins secondary, these are like, we have to pay very close attention to usage, health, etc. So starting with the Dolphins side of things, kind of curious usage for Jalen Ramsey. He was in the slots at a season high for him, snap total last week. Now, this is probably somewhat associated with one, Kader Kahu, the starting slot cornerback for the Dolphins, suffering a neck injury and being inactive that week. It is also likely somewhat tied to the fact that Marvin Harrison Jr., they faced the Arizona Cardinals. Marvin Harrison Jr. took a season high, I think it was 20 snaps lined up in the slot last week. Michael Wilson also totaled his second highest slot snap total last week against the Dolphins. So there were plenty of reasons for Jalen Ramsey to be lined up as the nickel corner. Interestingly or curiously, or perhaps ironically, Marvin Harrison, he had a huge week last week, but he only caught recorded 16 yards lined up in the slot, even though he was lined up there at a season high rate or snap total. He did over 100 yards of damage lined up on the perimeter. So that was kind of a funny development there. But Kader Kahu, I do expect him to miss this week. We'll see what ends up happening there. But I think fantasy managers need to pay attention to the Dolphins injury report to see where Kahu ends up. Because if he is in, then I think Ramsey goes back out to the perimeter. Either way, if Ramsey's in the slot, I think he's against Khalil Shakir. If he's on the perimeter, I think he's lining up against Amari Cooper, which greenlights Keon Coleman versus Kendall Fuller. The only reason that I really want to dig into that is if Kahu is active, then that means that we can start Khalil Shakir against him. If Kahu is inactive, I think Khalil Shakir becomes a lot dicier of an option because he's probably going to be facing Jalen Ramsey. So with all of that said, Keon Coleman over the last 2 weeks has logged 104 offensive snaps, leads Buffalo Bills wide receivers by a 22 snap margin. This guy's really having a good year. And I think some folks overcomplicated Coleman in the NFL draft process. I know that there were some red flags with his profile, but whenever we see a wide receiver who is performing as a wide receiver, he wasn't dominant, but he was out there performing. This is not a no-namer doing stuff as a wide receiver. He was out there performing as a wide receiver and critically killing it in the return game. That's something that we always have to pay attention to. When we see guys who are contributors as receivers and are high-end returners, that tells you that they are very good with the ball in their hands and that the coaching staff wants to get that guy as many touches as possible. Another name that we can call attention to, or a couple names we can call attention to here, players with a similar background, Rashid Shaheed and Antonio Brown. I'm not comparing Coleman playing style to those two guys. They're very different, but those are players who contributed as receivers and we're killing it in the return game. So that's something we can all think about as the 2025 draft season approaches. But anyway, Keon Coleman, really good with the ball in his hands. You can go down his data here, but among 65 NFL wide receivers with at least 175 receiving snaps, 14th in yards per run, 3rd in deep target rate, 15th in average depth of target, 4th in yards per reception, tied for 16th in missed tackles forced, etc. This guy's very good. Actually, I guess I kind of cut off there where it matters most. Missed tackles forced, tied for 16th, missed tackles forced per reception, 6th. He is 10th in explosive pass plays and 5th in explosive pass play rate. The guy can play. Amari Cooper's snap count is only increasing, which is, as I said, it's going to draw number one cornerback attention. I think Keon Coleman, he's a real NFL wide receiver. He is worthy of being a starter in our lineups every week. I don't know what his ceiling is. I don't know where he's going to settle in. Is he the team's true number one long term? I don't know. Maybe he'll just end up being a complimentary player, but I think right now he's a wide receiver 3.
Nice. It was beautifully said. Yeah, I mean, he's played really well, like you said, and he's been somebody. I think we talked about him last week, right? He was one of the starts for us last week, just as a name that I think he stood out in the man zone report as well. So he ended up hitting nicely, and I like the spot again for him this week. He's been somebody that has been really productive against man coverage. Khalil Shakir has done really good against zone coverage, although Khalil Shakir, honestly, he's done good against both man and zone. But yeah, they're both pretty good. So like the opportunity here against Miami. Miami also, they play about a league average rate of man and zone this season. They rank 26th in team coverage grade while in zone, and they place just above average in most team coverage metrics while in man. So let's go on to another player that we alluded to here, and one that we highlighted last week, like I said, and it was a big hit for us. He finished as, I think, like wide receiver 2 on the week, and he was in the man zone report. He was the cover boy for it last week. So doubling down here, and he's in the wide receiver cornerback matchup article this week as well. Ladd McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers going against Greg Newsome of the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah. So this game, One thing I want to point out, opened with a 2-point spread. Now it's down to 1.5. Since the Chargers week 5 bye, on plays with a point differential with three points or less, they've operated with a 65.7% passing rate, third highest among NFL teams. I expect this game. One thing I didn't mention previously, with Jameis Winston under center, I believe it was Cleveland. Yeah, Cleveland ranked 11th in EPA per play last week. I think that this offensive environment is going to be a pass happy one. As far as the cornerback matchup goes, Greg Newsome is the starting slot cornerback for the Browns. But with Denzel Ward likely out, I did see a report late yesterday afternoon that indicated Greg Newsome will not stay on the interior as the nickel corner. He's actually going to kick to the perimeter, which means that Cameron Mitchell would be the starting nickel corner. Now, I mentioned Cam Mitchell in this piece because here's what I wrote. This is Ward's primary backup, Cameron Mitchell, who I projected to start on the perimeter, although apparently he's going to start in the slot, has a combined 56.8 PFF perimeter coverage grade over the last 2 seasons. I can check his nickel grade, but it's not really going to be any better. This guy is a buried on the depth chart. I believe he was playing behind Mike Ford last year, who was a guy that I regularly targeted in the wide receiver cornerback matchup article. So I really like this one for Ladd, even if he is going to face Greg Newsome, who typically has been a pretty good player, but he's not having a very good year this year. Ranks 26th in targeted rate, 31st in yards allowed per coverage snap, and 28th in explosive pass plays allowed rate. The defense is just they're not doing their thing this year. So whether McConkey is facing Mitchell or Newsome, I like his odds against both.
Yeah, no, he looks like he's going to be in a great spot. I mean, the reason that we highlighted him last week and the reason that he was one of the top names in the wide receiver man zone report this week as well is because he plays so well against man coverage. He is 4th in fantasy points per route run against man. He's 2nd in PFF receiving grade with a 91.1 against man. He's 3rd in yards per route run against man, 4.31. And he's doing so with an elite 31.1% target rate. The reason that's important this week, the Browns play man coverage at a top 5 rate in the league, but they rank bottom 10 in yards allowed per coverage target and yards allowed per reception when in man coverage. There's just a lot of opportunity here, a lot of check boxes for Ladd McConkey. So, would love to see him go off again. And it does look like all signs are pointing to him being another great start. So, one more from the wide receiver cornerback matchup article, Nick. You got Jalen Coker of the Carolina Panthers going against Alontae Taylor of the Saints. What do you like about this one?
Yeah, so Coker, really interesting guy, undrafted free agent out of Holy Cross. He basically worked his way onto the field, I think in week 3 or week 4. He was not part of the starting lineup at all, but he's been going to battle against Xavier Legette for the number 1 wide receiver role in the post Deontay Johnson era. Season long, he's lined up in the slot at a 71.2% rate. Last week, with Deontay Johnson out of the lineup, he lined up there is 0.2% difference. Lines up on the perimeter, base 28% plus. What I noticed looking at the data with Deontay Johnson sidelined was Dave Canales basically hosted a competition for number 1 wide receiver duties. Both Jalen Coker and Xavier Legette earned 6 first read targets. Coker, he caught 4 of them, generated 3 explosive pass plays, and averaged 3.55 yards per out run on those designed plays. Xavier Legette still had a pretty good day, but was certainly behind Coker. 2.62 yards per out run, 1 explosive pass play, caught 3 of the 6 passes. His PFF receiving grade distantly trails Coker's 61.8 PFF receiving grade distantly trails Coker's 80.1 PFF receiving grade. I think Coker is previously I kind of thought of him as maybe a contributor. I think he's actually an NFL starter. This week, he's going up against the New Orleans Saints secondary that lost Paulson Adebo to a broken femur in week 8. And now Marshawn Lattimore, this guy's been banged up like crazy all year, strained his hamstring in week 7, Thursday Night Football. They put him back out there for week 8 and he re-injured it, which is what tends to happen with those injuries. They might try to make a play through this one, but I can't imagine he's going to be 100%. I don't think he will play, or I don't think that the medical staff should clear him to play, which would basically leave this team with its let's see here, the number 3 corner, rookie Kool-Aid McKinstry, kind of roaming the perimeter. He's a good player, but it's a rookie getting a start, sidekicked by 2 backups. So I think Coker, he's going to be able to go up against their backup slot cornerback on 70% of the plays. To give a little bit more info on the guy, ties for 10th in missed tackles forced per reception, 0.25, second in explosive pass play rate, and ranks 3rd in catch rate among 36 NFL slot receivers with at least 80 slot receiving snaps. He'll get some work on the banged up perimeter as well. I think Coker is a viable starter. I'll be starting him where I have him. Probably more so a flex play than a wide receiver 3, but it looks to me like we have an NFL starter on our hands.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like Coker quite a bit. Like, I think there's definitely a non-zero chance that, he ends up being the best receiver on this team, even over Xavier Legette, who they spent a first-round pick on, right? Like, he's certainly been the most effective wide receiver on the team so far. Like you laid out, leads the team in yards per route run, yards per reception, receiving grade. And, sure, it's a small sample, still early, whatever, but this is kind of what we saw from him in the FCS as well, where he was dominant and starting to translate to the NFL here. So hard to ignore Jalen Coker at this point. And like you said, Alontae Taylor, definitely someone we could take advantage of. 40.4 coverage grade on the year. He's given up 2 touchdowns over the past 3 weeks. So like the call. Okay, for me, I wanted to highlight Josh Downs as kind of my play of the week here at wide receiver, because he's another guy that checks a lot of boxes for both. He comes in through the O-line D-line matchup article and the wide receiver man zone data. He's been good all season long, and I'm expecting that to continue this week. It feels like a non-obvious call, especially I guess it feels like an obvious call is what I'm saying, especially as he gets Joe Flacco at quarterback, who has been the QB to deliver, most of his fantasy points this season, but still one I want to highlight because Josh Downs has finished as the PPR wide receiver 8, wide receiver 17, and wide receiver 14 in games where Joe Flacco has been under center. And this week should be more of the same in a favorable matchup here. Downs' potential this week, as far as advantage in the trenches goes, on non-pressure dropbacks, he's seeing an elite 36.1% target rate, which not only leads the entire team, but it ranks 4th in the entire league across all positions for players who've run at least 25 routes. And the reason that's important, the Colts offensive line, one of the best in the league, 84.6 pass blocking grade, is the best mark in the league. And the Vikings defensive line, 26th in pass rush grade. Josh Downs also has been excellent against both man and zone this season, but against zone specifically, which he should see a lot of this week, where the Vikings play a top 5 rate, but they are below average in yards allowed per reception and yards allowed per coverage target. And Minnesota also owns the 3rd worst first down plus touchdown rate from zone. So Josh Downs against zone ranks 7th in fantasy points per route run among wide receivers with at least 100 routes. And he's again earning an elite 30.3% target rate. So very happily firing up Josh Downs this week. All right, let's go to, actually, I got one more wide receiver here. Jayden Reed of the Green Bay Packers. So just another guy I wanted to highlight, and worth noting that Jordan Love, he is questionable heading into this week's game after leaving the week 8 game, right, with the groin injury, but apparently trending in the right direction. I don't know.
He's practicing. Just
okay.
The alert came through 30 seconds ago. He is practicing.
Beautiful. So there you go. So trending in the right direction here for week 9. Obviously, if Love wasn't able to go, it would be a downgrade here for Jordan Reed, but still like the matchup here. The Lions are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. That being the first thing. The other part of it is hopefully an advantage in the trenches for Jordan Love as well, to keep him clean, where the Packers offensive line owns an 83.8 pass blocking grade. That's the 2nd highest mark this season. They're allowing just a 22.3% pressure rate. That's the 8th best mark. And the Lions, in 2 weeks without Aiden Hutchinson, their defensive line ranks just 21st in pass rush grade, and they rank 27th in quick pressure rate. So on non-pressure dropbacks, Jayden Reed is seeing a high-end target rate of 24.6%, significantly higher than his 9.4% target rate on pressure dropbacks, which is like 6th on the team. And then his 2.48 yards per route run on non-pressured dropbacks also ranks 14th among all wide receivers who have run at least 100 routes. So liking Jaden Reed as a potential bounce back this week as after a few quiet weeks in a row.
No notes.
Awesome. And then I only have a couple quick hitters from the wide receiver man zone report, because we've talked a little bit about some of the players that I really liked here, and some of the other ones are like really obvious, like AJ Brown is in an amazing spot to just go off this week. But some of the maybe the other non-obvious plays, Troy Franklin of the Denver Broncos. I love talking about Troy Franklin, but going against the Baltimore Ravens here, you like Bo Nix. I know it wasn't the week for Troy Franklin last week. We actually touched on that, how it wasn't necessarily going to be Troy Franklin week. Thought it might be Devon Vele week, but that didn't work out either. But Troy Franklin does stand out as kind of like a deep league flex option this week. He's earned a 45.5% target rate versus man coverage, and ranks in the top 10 of wide receivers who have run at least 20 routes in fantasy points per route run against man coverage. The Ravens do play man coverage at an above average rate, but they rank 30th in yards allowed per coverage snap and last in first down plus touchdown rate allowed from man coverage. So Troy Franklin, somebody that stands out in those metrics and could be a nice deep play. And then Tank Dell of the Houston Texans going on tonight against the New York Jets. He's going to have to take on the role, obviously, of the top wide receiver with Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs out. It's good timing as well, because Dell has been much more successful against man coverage this season than he has against zone. He ranks 19th in PFF receiving grade against man as well. And the Jets have played man coverage at a top 10 rate this season, but they are only around like league average in most team coverage metrics from man, including a 56.1% defensive success rate, which is 16th. So liking Tank Dell quite a bit, but anything else for you to add in this group?
Nope, we're rocking.
Let's go. All right, we got one ad break this week. It is from our friends at BetterHelp. Think of a time recently when you didn't feel like you could be your full self, like you were hiding behind a mask. October is the season for wearing masks and costumes, but some of us feel like we wear a mask and hide more often than we want to. At work and social settings around our family, therapy can help you learn to accept all parts of yourself so you can take off the mask, because masks should be for Halloween fun, not for our emotions. Therapy can be really useful to get a better understanding of how your mind actually works and to become more aware of your own patterns of behavior and how to improve them. It's useful for everybody, not just people struggling with something specific. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is a convenient, flexible, and entirely online way to get therapy that's right for you. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/PFFfantasy and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/PFFfantasy. All right, let's talk some wide receiver sits now. And we're going to go to the wide receiver cornerback matchup article, Nick. And who is the first name on the list for you?
Parker Washington, who has flashed at times, but he really is not a very good player. I think he's had like 2 island game performances where he's kind of shown out, but the guy just really can't earn targets. So looking at last season, when Christian Kirk suffered a grade 3 inguinal groin strain and was ruled out for the remainder of the season, Parker Washington started in the slot for him. Information on the current state of the Jaguars wide receiver core is really bizarre. Brian Thomas Jr. initially was like fine, and then they called him he could miss 2 to 4 weeks, and now they're calling him day to day, and he's practicing in a limited capacity. But the Jaguars, they make everybody practice in a limited capacity. It is bizarre. Like Gabe Davis, Evan Ingram, and Travis Etienne for the last 3 weeks basically have practiced in a limited capacity every day. Evan Ingram finally began practicing in full, I think, Thursday last week. But the point is, this injury report is very difficult to parse because, like, Evan Ingram hasn't played since he injured his hamstring, I think, in week 6. But Travis Etienne has not played since injuring his hamstring in week 6. But he's been limited every day. So I don't look at that at Ryan Thomas Jr. being a limited participant and would feel heartened by that. It's very strange. I don't really understand what they're doing with their injury report. Anyway, we do know that Christian Kirk is out for the year because he broke his clavicle, which is also called his collarbone. And I don't know why we do that, but we do. So Parker Washington is going to start there. Last season, we can use his weeks 13 to 18 sample when he was starting. He was out targeted by journeyman wide receiver Zay Jones 38 to 19. Washington earned a 10.8% target rate. Like my voice deflates as I'm reading. He averaged 0.71 yards per out run during that start. He's just not, Parker Washington is not a good player. I think he's a fine backup, but this guy is not a starting caliber player. It's too bad. I would love to root for him. If he does cool stuff this week, I will say good for you, dude. But he's facing Philadelphia Eagles nickel cornerback Cooper DeJean, who we've talked about a number of times on this show. The guy had a hamstring strain in August that really kind of derailed the early portion of his career, but he's been killing it since he's been on the field. Second in PFF slot coverage grade, 8th in target rate, tied for 12th in catch rate allowed, 4th in yards allowed per coverage snap, and 10th in explosive pass plays allowed rate. The guy is really good, and Parker Washington is expected to basically face him all day long. So I don't want anything to do with this. I know a lot of people burned a waiver spot. If you want to start him and bank on volume, like go ahead. Also Gabe Davis, though, he is practicing. Now, again, what does limited tell us? I don't know. He's injured. He's got a shoulder injury. It's possible that they just roll out their starting lineup except for Christian Kirk, and like Parker Washington is just running cardio. It's also possible he's the only healthy receiver out there, but I think either way, Evan Ingram is the guy that we're starting from this passing offense. It's not Parker Washington. God, I really dug into him there. I hate doing that. I don't want people to think that he's going to be a good spot start.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, if it's not Brian Thomas or Evan Ingram, I'm just going to have a really hard time trusting any of these Jacksonville receiving options right now. We talked about even Gabe Davis being more matchup dependent as well. Before, maybe, like you said, maybe Parker Washington surprises us and steps up and has a big game, but is it really worth trusting him in your lineup for that? I don't know. Like you said, it seems suboptimal this week. So especially with how well Cooper DeJean has played. But you got another wide receiver here in the matchups to avoid. Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots, who is going to be lining up against Roger McCreary of the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, McCreary's a guy I picked on through the first 2 years of his career, but he's having a really good year now in his third NFL season. Career best numbers here: average depth of target 3.9, yards allowed per reception 5.9, yards allowed per coverage snap 0.71, and explosive pass plays allowed rate less than 1%. All four figures rank 7th or better among 39 NFL slot defensive backs with at least 80 slot coverage snaps. Demario Douglas just not very. He's so dependent on his surroundings. I think he belongs as the number 3 receiver in an NFL lineup, and I like him, but he really struggles to be a big time difference maker on his own. Ties for 17th in yards per out run among 36 NFL slot receivers with at least 80 slot receiving snaps, 21st in ADOT, 22nd in target rate, 32nd in deep target rate. He relies entirely on post-catch productivity. We don't know what's going on with Drake May for this week. He's in the concussion protocol. Looking at Doctor of Physical Therapy Adam Hutchison's 2023 injury report, because it's free and the new one is not free. Quarterbacks who suffer a concussion average 1.9 games missed. I think he was practicing in a limited capacity yesterday. Folks can go double check me on that, but they've got to go through. He's got to remain symptom-free, and the data suggests he won't remain symptom-free. If he does, that's great. And hey, that improves things for Douglas a little bit. Maybe brings him up from wide receiver 60 to 50. But I'm still not going, woohoo, we can start him because Drake May is there. Roger McCreary is a really good player.
Yeah, no, I like it. I'm with you. Surprisingly, I feel like I'm trusting Kayshon Boutte slightly more this week. Again, a little bit based on the man zone data, but he's going against the Tennessee Titans. They're playing man coverage at a top 10 rate, and Boutte has been really good against man, and he's also led the Patriots in routes run over the past 3 games as well, and leads the team in fantasy points per route run against man coverage. So he's kind of like an intriguing option for me for deeper fantasy leagues, but I'm with you. I think there'll be better matchups here for Demario Douglas going forward.
Okay. Last one. Last one. Yeah, last one. Cincinnati Bengals number we don't know receiver, Andre Yoshivas, facing Las Vegas Raiders cornerback Jacorian Bennett. Here's the deal. T. Higgins suffered a strained quadriceps muscle in the week 8 Friday practice. This is his 9th recorded thigh muscle soft tissue injury. He has strained his hamstrings 8 times, which is insane. And he keeps doing it in practice. He, of course, we went through the same song and dance in week 1. In the lead up to kickoff, he tells reporters, I'm feeling so good. I can't wait to go out there. And then he doesn't play. At this point, when T. Higgins says, I feel great, and he's dealing with a soft tissue injury, I'm going, this is a red flag. Because it's BS. Anyway, so what happened last week with T. Higgins sidelines? Yoshivas took 17 snaps apiece, lined up wide right and wide left. I guess I did that with my wrong hands, but for the camera, it works the right way. He took 16 snaps lined up in the slot, which meant Jamar Chase ended up going inside, lining up in the slot more frequently than he did previously, and it brought Jermaine Burton into the lineup for a season high. I think it was 34 receiving snaps, maybe 24, but it was a season high. I've got it buried in here somewhere. Anyway, Yoshivas, he is really best suited to being the interior receiver. He's not very good on the perimeter. And I think moving like next year, if they let T. Higgins walk, Jermaine Burton is running routes on the perimeter with Yoshivas in the slot. I think that he'll actually be more stable next year. But right now, with the way that they're running things and they're making him, they're kind of just having him do wind sprints up and down the sidelines, that he's just not very great. So he finished with a 7.9% target rate, 3 total targets last week, did not catch a single one. Meanwhile, Jermaine Burton produced a wide receiver core best 2.41 yards per out run. He really flashed last week. He's earned 5 targets this season, caught 2 of them, taken both of them for explosive plays. There's no way that Zach Taylor's going, I don't want to see any more of him. Now, this week, they're going to give Jermaine Burton more opportunity regardless of if T. Higgins is in the lineup. I don't think T. Higgins will be in the lineup because his legs don't work, but maybe he will. Either way, I think Yoshivas right now, I think he's losing his grip on this number 3 role. And I think Jermaine Burton is going to get increased opportunities this week. And with him running more routes on the perimeter than he would with T. Higgins in the lineup, it means that he's with the way that he's been aligned out wide, he's going to line up against Jacorian Bennett more often than any other cornerback. And Jacorian Bennett is a really good cornerback, and he's really good at swatting passes that come his way. So I don't want anything to do with this.
Nice. There you go. Okay, so I've actually highlighted Jalen Waddle as one of my sits this week, and honestly, maybe part of this is a subconscious thing where I'm hoping, that calling him out is motivational, and he has a big game in spite of me saying that he's a sit. But here's the thing: we know that Waddle has lost some fantasy value without Tua at quarterback, but then even including games where Tua's been at quarterback, Waddle's involvement in the offense hasn't really been ideal, and it just points to another potentially lower output game in week 9 here, going against the Buffalo Bills. So the Bills are a very good defense. Their defensive line ranks 7th in pass rush grade as a unit this season, while also ranking 10th in quick pressure rate. On pressure dropbacks, Jalen Waddle ranks 71st among 107 qualifying wide receivers and tight ends in target rate at 10.5%. And that's like 5th on the team as well. So his target rate of 19.6% on non-pressure dropbacks is a pretty big difference as well, where some of, his low production could be explained behind like an average offensive line, and why, the target rate overall is low, because on these pressure dropbacks, it's a big drop off there. The Bills are also allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position, just kind of adding to the concerns there. The Dolphins wide receivers as a whole have not excelled against zone coverage this season, and that didn't really change in like a great matchup last week against the Arizona Cardinals, and with Tua Tagovailoa back in the lineup. The Bills have played zone coverage at a top 10 rate. They rank among the 3 best teams in the league in yards per target allowed and yards allowed per reception from zone. For me, just feels difficult to kind of fully embrace Waddle at this point here in week 9. I really want to see him break out of this slump, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to happen this week. Like we talked about Josh Downs at the top. For me, I don't know. Is it crazy to go Josh Downs over Jalen Waddle this week, or am I overthinking things here?
No, that's fine. Josh Downs, it's the right situation for him. I don't mind these types of matchup based calls, but it can get one in trouble when you fade the talent too hard. But Josh Downs is really talented.
Yep. No, I'm with you. And it's one of those situations we know that Jalen Waddle has like wide receiver one abilities. It's just we haven't seen it yet this season. And again, tougher matchup. We want to see Tua back to full strength here and get that offense operating the way they should be. So I only have one other group to kind of avoid this week. It's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers. I know they're an intriguing group. Baker Mayfield still playing really well without his top-notch wide receivers in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. We expected that last week. Baker was one of our streamers as well and performed well. But without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin included, all the wide receivers on Tampa Bay rank outside the top 40 in fantasy success against man coverage. Probably going to be avoided this week in a difficult matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs, who do play man coverage at a top 10 rate this season, and they rank well above average in most team coverage metrics, including 7th in yards allowed per coverage target, 11th in first down plus touchdown rate allowed. There will be other weeks where I think I trust these guys a little bit more, especially with Baker at quarterback, who's played really well, but not necessarily this week for me.
Yeah, I keep staring at Jalen McMillan here. It's a weird situation because Kansas City lost their number 2 and 3 maybe cornerbacks. But they use their safeties a lot in slot cover. It's a deep situation to try to parse.
Yeah. All right, let's go to some running backs now, and we'll start with the running back starts that we have, and I'll get to Nate's in a second, but I'm going to start with Chuba Hubbard for the Carolina Panthers. I pulled from the offensive line, defensive line article here, and Hubbard, obviously, he's coming off a poor week where he finished as like PPR wide receiver or PPR running back 36 or something like that. Much lower output than what I think we've come to expect from him this season. He's been really solid, but he's going up against the Saints, who are giving up the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. The Saints defensive line also has allowed 2.1 rushing yards before contact per attempt, which is the worst mark in the league. And they rank 31st in run defense grade as well, with a 45.1. When you look at Chuba Hubbard, when he's given at least 1 rushing yard before contact, he's earned a 91.0 rushing grade. That ranks as the 11th best mark among 49 qualifying running backs. His first down plus touchdown rate of 35.2% also ranks as an above average mark under those same conditions and qualifying running backs. So for me, just really simple. Even like after a quiet week here, I just feel more optimistic about a bounce back for Chuba Hubbard in week 9. So I'm not overly concerned about too much for him this week.
I'm trying to figure out what's going on with Tony Pollard's foot injury here, because I do think that this is I love the matchup. He showed up on the injury report as a DNP. There's one of these aggregator accounts telling us that he is not expected to miss week. Not who knows about that. For whatever reason, I figured an East Coast team, East-ish Coast team might have information out by now for today's practice report, but I'm not seeing anything yet. I, in one league, dropped Anthony Richardson to go pick up Tyjae Spears, who's only rostered in 46% of Yahoo leagues, I think. So if Spears is out there, who's been recovering from his hamstring injury, now's the time to go make that move, go get that guy. It's entirely possible Tony Pollard is totally fine, and yesterday was just a precautionary rest day, but it's just something to monitor. Go check if Tyjae Spears is available in your league.
Yeah. So this is in reference to Nate's running back start pick here, which is Tony Pollard. Like you said, of the Tennessee Titans, he's Nate points out like he's been good this season. Obviously, he's got 5 games with top 20 fantasy running back, but the only games where he's kind of really failed to be the top 20 running back is when the Titans have fallen behind by multiple scores. But that hasn't always been the case either. And then if you look at PFF strength of schedule tool, Titans have the week's fourth best matchup for running backs going against the New England Patriots. New England giving up the fifth most fantasy points to running back this season. Titans are also favorites to win this game. And Pollard, when they're in their only other victory this season, Pollard's run the ball 22. He ran the ball 22 times in that game. And like you said, he did show up on the injury report with the foot. I don't know what's going on there. But if he can't go, it's either Pollard or Tajay Spears. Either one of these guys, I think, could be really solid picks in week 9.
Yeah, I apologize. I think I just jumped ahead there. I was frantically scanning for the injury report for today because it should be coming out in the next 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So yeah, apologies for getting distracted there.
No, it's all good. So let's go to some running back sits now. So one of the ones I highlighted again from the offensive line, defensive line article is Rico Dowdle of the Dallas Cowboys. He's actually been pretty solid for fantasy purposes before missing last week's game with an illness. He was the PPR RB9 from weeks 4 to 6. However, a little bit concerned about the matchup this week. The Cowboys offensive line has generated just 0.9 rushing yards before contact per attempt. That ranks 28th. They've managed just a 62.0 run blocking grade. That ranks 21st. Falcons defensive line ranks 14th in run defense grade, but they've also only allowed just 1.1 rushing yard before contact per attempt. That's the 7th best mark in the league. And when you're looking at Dowdle, when contacted 2 or fewer yards from the line of scrimmage, he's averaging just 2.6 yards per carry. That ranks 34th among 62 qualifying running backs. And his first down plus touchdown rate of 7.7% in those same circumstances and among the same qualifying running backs ranks 52nd. So I think this is one of those matchups where it might seem like it's okay on paper, but really not a strong matchup here when you dive into the data. The Falcons are also among the 10 best teams in preventing fantasy points per game to the running back position. So as good as Dowdle was in that stretch there before he missed last week's game, if he's back, assuming he's back this week, which I think he will be, I'd be avoiding him this week. And then the last one for running back sits that we have is Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. This one from Nate's Start Sit article as well. I mean, Nate is up and down on Javonte Williams, kind of like the rest of us. And here's the thing that Nate points out with Williams, to have him as a sit this week, even though he is, the clear kind of lead running back, playing around 35 to 42 snaps every week. The key being that when the Broncos are winning, he runs 13 plus times, but in their 3 losses, he's run 6 to 11 times for only 17 to 23 yards. He's also been targeted more in wins than losses. So what are we expecting this week? Well, according to PFF strength of schedule tool, the Broncos have the 3rd worst matchup for running backs this week against the Baltimore Ravens. We talked about Baltimore's pass defense. It hasn't been great. We talked about that at the top, obviously, but their run defense has actually been pretty good. They've allowed less than 70 rushing yards per game, only 3.3 yards per carry as well. So just not expecting Williams to be overly efficient this week. Ravens are also 9.5 point favorites. So just very well could be like the other games where the Broncos trail and just not run very often. So like Nate points out, Williams, he's going to be a fantasy starter in a lot of games over the rest of the year, this just not being one of them. All right, let's go to our waiver wire question marks now. Nick, you got a couple names to highlight here that are worth talking about this week. Where would you like to start with our waiver wire names?
Yeah, so we've got here, first off, Joe Flacco, Indianapolis Colts quarterback, evidently, facing the Minnesota Vikings. The thing that I want to draw attention to here is, I think you've already kind of nailed this with Josh Downs. The Vikings, they blitz constantly, and a lot of the time they are able to generate sacks, which basically kills drives. The data is pretty clear there. It sharply reduces successful scoring drive rates, but when they aren't able to get home, they do give up a ton of explosive pass plays. They lead the NFL on blitz plays. They lead the NFL in total explosive pass plays allowed. What this means is, I think Josh Downs, I think this is a great matchup for him. He's going to get behind the defense. He'll probably rip off a long one. I do think that fantasy managers have to understand, though, that Joe Flacco is going to this will be a volatile showing. Could really smash here. Could also totally drop the bottom out. So if you're going to go with Joe Flacco, you have to be comfortable with the fact that this could be a 300-yard performance or like a 150-yard performance. I think it'll be highly variant. Anytime you have a monster performance potential, though, that shouldn't just be ignored. And if you're willing to risk it, there might be a biscuit. I'm sorry, that was terrible. Do you have any thoughts here for Joe Flacco?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Like, I'm starting him in some super flex leagues because that's probably the only place I kind of see him having any value this week for fantasy. I think you got to be pretty decimated at quarterback to start him in like one QB formats. Maybe, I don't know, maybe like a more than like a Trevor Lawrence or something this week, right? Because again, Lawrence without like a lot of his top wide receivers, but yeah, he's been fine. Flacco, like as a quarterback, I obviously I disagree with the benching of Anthony Richardson. I said that on the waiver wire pod, and I just think it's crazy. But here we are. We got Joe Flacco as a starting quarterback. I'm not trusting him for fantasy purposes outside of Superflex, basically.
Okay. Moving on to the next one here. So with Jameis Winston's installation, we now suddenly have viable pass catchers in this offense. Elijah Moore has frustrated us for years now, but he, along with the rest of these guys, suddenly someone that we have to start taking seriously. Elijah Moore, very likely to be going up against. They do their friggin' thing. So the Chargers are doing a bunch of nonsense with how they align their cornerbacks, but I do think that Elijah Moore, his usage over the last few weeks has kind of stabilized here. So 7 targets in week 7, 11 in week 8. I like this. So I've already profiled this game as one that I think that can kind of the two passing offenses can kind of pop off. There are, Jameis Winston, he can tank games with his interception type, infatuation. But over the last 2 weeks, Elijah Moore averaging 1.73 yards per out run. That's decent. It's not great, but that's decent. 24.7% target rate. I think that if you need a viable wide receiver 3, Elijah Moore deserves consideration here. Where are you at on him?
Yeah, I like Elijah Moore. Like I said this, I think on the waiver wire pod too. Like he sneakily kind of looked like their best wide receiver last week, even though it was Cedric Tillman who kind of popped off, right? Moore, he earned the best receiving grade on the team. He also earned by far the highest target rate on the team, 33.3%, despite running fewer routes than Tillman and Jerry Jeudy. He also led the team in yards per route run, 2.58. So, again, I like the potential of Moore. He's flashed it on occasion. We just haven't got anything consistent from him. And I'm just hoping that, with this larger opportunity now, maybe we can get that going. And then with Jameis at quarterback too, it's obviously an upgrade from what Deshaun Watson said. So I'm optimistic for him, like, rest of season as somebody that I would definitely roster and hope that, things start to line up and he strings together a few more performances, but it could definitely start this week against the Chargers. I don't mind the deeper start for him.
Okay, let's rock and roll. Bring this thing home here. Streaming defenses of the week: Philadelphia Eagles DST versus Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm checking on the current spread. It opened, I believe, at 7.5. It remains at 7.5, meaning Philadelphia 7.5 point favorite. I think this is just going to be a pass rush heavy day. Philadelphia, they've had some performance issues, but we talked about Cooper DeJean. I think he's going to do his thing this week. And the edge rush and the interior guys, they're going to go get after it as well. Shout out to Milton Williams. Love that guy. Little interior or big interior rotational pass rusher. I think he's one of my favorite players. Hefty boy getting after the quarterback here. But things to know: Jacksonville Jaguars passing offense already ranks 22nd in EPA per play. Now they could be without who knows how many wide receivers. Their prospects are not improving. Trevor Lawrence ranks 27th in turnover worthy play rate, 21st in pressure to sack rate. this guy, I don't know if this guy's got it. I know the Urban Meyer stuff and now Doug Peterson is kind of stuck in the Stone Age here, but Trevor, I think he might just be like a, below average NFL starter. Philadelphia's pass rush, meanwhile, 14th in pass rush productivity to pass defense, 9th in completion rate allowed, 7th in yards allowed per coverage snap, while ranking and or tying for 3rd in pass rush win rate and explosive pass plays allowed rate. I think that this unit just gets the job done. Do you have anything you want to add here about Philadelphia's defense, John?
Yeah, no, I like what you said there about, again, their pass rush too. And then Jacksonville just traded away their best offensive tackle this week, Cam Robinson.
Good
right?
point.
Right. So it's just going to be a little bit worse for them. The Eagles' 6th highest sack percentage in the league. They're also allowing the 3rd best mark as far as explosive play rate allowed, meaning that they're very good at reducing explosive play rates. They're allowing just 5.1 yards per play, 6th best mark in the league. You mentioned it. They're decimated at wide receiver, Jacksonville. So who knows who they're going to get for this game and in what shape. So I'm with you. This is a great streaming spot for Philadelphia.
Rock and roll. Last one, Cincinnati Bengals defense versus the Las Vegas Raiders. We like Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers, but outside of that, this offense is so uninspiring. And now they might be getting guard Dylan Parham back, maybe. But they also could be without their center, Andre James. The offensive line is probably their best thing they've got going outside of Myers and Bowers. A weakened interior defensive line against an ascending interior blockers. They're in trouble. Cincinnati's defensive tackle unit was very banged up earlier this year, but they are returning to full health. BJ Hill, very good pass rusher. I think that they can give this offense fits from start to finish. I outlined his performances as well as edge rusher Trey Hendrickson's in the piece. Cincinnati ranks 12th in both yards allowed per coverage snap and interceptions per coverage snap rate, 11th in explosive pass plays allowed rate. Meanwhile, Gardner Minshew, 3.6% turnover-worthy play rate, ranks 29th. 59.4 PFF passing grade, ranks 35th. He has a 24.1% pressure to sack rate, which ranks 33rd, and he has lost fumbles in consecutive games. I think he's up to 5 turnovers over the last 2 weeks. And keep in mind, he wasn't even the starter 2 weeks ago. He's accomplished that in 1.5 games. So that'll bring us home.
Yeah. So yeah, the Raiders offense, like you said, they're the worst offense in the league. If you're looking at EPA per play, they're 29th in the league in yards per play, 29th in touchdown drive percentage. They stink. I mean, I would just throw to Brock Bowers every play and try to get him to break Laporta's rookie record from last season and just make that the focus for the rest of the season, because otherwise, I mean, they're toast here. So yeah, couldn't agree more. But that's going to do it for this week. Thank you all again for tuning in. As always, if you enjoyed this, feel free to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already, or leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That helps us a ton as well. Nick, big shout out to you for doing this with me again this week. Before you go, please do remind everybody what you have going on at pff.com this week.
Tuesdays, you can find QB streamers and defense streamers of the week. Wednesdays, you can get the pass run funnel report. I always want to say pass fun report, which is that works. Yeah. Thursday mornings, wide receiver cornerback matchups to target and avoid. Thank you, John.
Of course. And yeah, for me, wide receiver man zone coverage report, that's out now on pff.com, as well as O-line, D-line matchups to target and avoid will be out Friday morning. IDP rankings, IDP fantasy report are out now for my IDP friends. And of course, make sure to check out Nate's ranking, start sit article, and his recap articles as well. Good luck to everybody in week 9. And until next time, peace out.